Okay, welcome everyone. Looks like we got a familiar crew here who continue to be engaged and interested in the process of revising AICS regulations around, in this case, off-campus instruction, but all of our regulations for academic program review. And we may have a few more who pop in. I know last time we met, which was about 2 weeks ago, had a very ambitious idea that we were gonna make minor changes to this policy and we would be able to get them through on AICS commission meeting, which is in June, and we have to finalize documents for that in a couple of weeks. And I've received a lot of emails and contacts and questions from institutions who are very interested in making sure that we get this right and that we have enough time to be more circumspect. And so I think we are not going to push it too fast. We're going to carry on with our work and take the time that we need. My hope is that we'll be able to bring forward something, a consensus version of the off-campus policy at the September.
Okay.
All right, are there questions before we get going? Okay, well, as always, do pop in with questions as you find that they come to your minds. And we will post the recording of this session on AICS website. And here we go. Let's see here. I think I might be sharing the wrong screen. Hold on a second. Too many windows open in too many places. All right. I think I got what I need now. All right. Thanks everybody for your patience. Okay, we got the windows. All right, so last time we looked at this, it had a previous version, number, date on it, and y'all can all see this, right? And it should also be in the chat for anybody who wants to follow along. And just in case you don't see it, I will also share it afterward. Okay.
Robin, can you make it just a little bit bigger?
Yes. So this page, though, just so you know, is just kind of a keeping us on track page, just to see that we are, all the green are things that we have done already. Here we go. Now, every time I keep doing this, it's doing something weird. Sorry, folks. All right. So green is what we've done already. And then these red ones are what we're working on. Okay, now, is that big enough where y'all can see it? Especially since we got Career New.
Yeah, thank you.
Much better, thank you.
Okay, so we're looking at the draft that I made some interventions on, and I also wanted to make sure that we talked about certain scenarios, but since we don't have that kind of urgency of time, I think we'll have opportunities to work through the issues. Okay, so I've also tried to highlight things that have been added, changed, and need discussion. So for this part, purpose, commission responsibility, this is the same as what we talked about last time. Now, this section I should have highlighted because I wanted to talk to y'all about this. I don't think it's particularly controversial here, but in the previous version, we had off-campus sites just with this definition, and then no specification of types of off-campus sites. And I think in going through this, I found that it made sense to maybe keep with the original policy, which defined exempt and non-exempt very early on. And then that can allow us to move forward. So This just says that, you know, off-campus sites are exempt or non-exempt. And exempt sites are, so the black again is what was in the original policy, are exempt from approval and require prior notification only. All right, so sites, now previously these have been grouped into statutory and then eight approved exemptions that the commission did. I guess they were back in 2007. And I thought that it was just easier to group them all as exempt, but then add this text that says whether the exemption was based on statute, which these all are, or down here toward the bottom of the list, off-campus sites where, you know, in prisons, these are exempted by commission. This other one, high school sites exempted by the commission and so forth. Now, I did want to, and then non-exempt sites, obviously. So we've got off-campus sites, exempt, non-exempt. Right now, these two, F and G, individual study and study abroad, I would like to make the recommendation that we actually take these out of the exemptions list because AIC does not do any exempting or paperwork on these at all. We would rather consider these exclusions. So our interest is really in off-campus sites that are, you know, operating in the state. And so what I've recommended here is that we put these exclusions down under the scope. So bear with me while I scroll. Scope is the next section after definitions. We had talked about this last time. The rule shall apply only to off-campus sites located, and I'm recommending shortening this to within the state. And then we had also talked last time about being specific about what is excluded. And this is where the exclusions, the two for study abroad and also for individual study, I put them in here. So it doesn't apply to off-campus sites located out of state. That includes international, but also state sites that are right across the border in Tennessee or Mississippi or Georgia. And it doesn't apply to distance education offerings, non-credit offerings, or individual study. Okay, so what do y'all think? I know y'all would tell me if you had serious objections. But the impact of adding these exclusions is that we don't even want to know about them under this policy versus knowing about something and designating it as exempt so we get less information or have less oversight.
Right. I think it's fine, but I'm making notes. We have commencement tomorrow, so we have a lot of people from JSU that couldn't be on this call, and we're going to discuss it at a meeting. But I'm just making notes as we go, but I think it's pretty much, I think it's fine.
So just to emphasize again, I'm just proposing reorganizing some of the language. We're not either adding or subtracting. It's just hopefully a little bit more clear. The other option is we could move scope up above definitions to make it clear that we're excluding those things before. That's easy enough to do as well.
Robin, this is Rena. I just have a question. Do we have a lot of off-campus sites that are located out of state?
Yes.
Okay.
Some institutions do have quite a presence out of state. I'm sorry to pick on Troy. There are a lot of sites that Troy has that are all across the country and they have physical presence there. Yeah.
Okay.
And since our jurisdiction, our responsibility to go back up to the beginning is really about this kind of, being the umpire within the state of service areas, then we don't want to, we'll leave it to you to deal with SAC, COC
right
around those out of state and study abroad sites.
I just wanted to, and Troy was in my mind, but I didn't know if they were the only ones. So,
They
okay,
may, I know that they have a very big presence. I can't,
yeah. Well, I know they have stuff on military bases too, so that's, they're delivering in different ways too, so, okay.
and I would think that
And
some
that's an exempt
institutions that
site.
are closer to the border with another state may also have this as something that they consider regularly.
Well, I may have actually been driving in Georgia and saw an Auburn site over there, like across the border recently too, so, okay, yeah. But I don't know if they're delivering courses there, just.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, so back to this. So we're going through definitions here. So off-campus site, and then we make two types exempt. And we're kind of putting all the exemptions all together, removing some exemptions that are really exclusions. And then we have non-exempts. Okay. All right, this we talked about last time. So I don't know that there's much else to say, which is we are trying to stick close to what SAC's definitions are for branch campuses and off-campus facilities. And so this definition that appears at B for branch campus is the definition that SACS has. And there is another section of AICS rulemaking that deals with designation of branch campus sites. We have in the open forums not spent any time with that. So if there is interest in talking about branch sites and what it takes to become a branch site, we can do that. But it is right now that part of the policy, which is at this number, just says you have to have an off-campus site in operation for 5 years and then can think about designating it as a branch. So that is probably different from what SACS requires for branch campuses. And I have not spent enough time researching those differences to be speaking in an educated way about it. All right, back to our definitions: instruction, course, program. Okay, so we spent a little bit of time in our last open forum talking about programs, and I've also done some background research on this. It seems that when this policy was made in 2007, one of the considerations that was very important was about programs being offered at off-campus sites. Okay, so let me pause that because I see in the chat that Stacy is asking, what about internships and like clinical sites? Yeah, I think we would not want to include those as off-campus sites. SACS excludes them, don't they?
I believe so. Just when you said
They do.
But we can also be specific and say we exclude them. I'm sorry. Courses offered on an individual study basis. Okay, let me just add here. Clinical.
Robin, that probably
sites.
covers on an individual study basis, would cover an internship, I believe. But since you mentioned individual study, I just thought there are lots of other courses like that. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's really just for notes for you. You didn't have to address.
Right, that's,
Thank you.
no, but I do agree that internship and independent, individual study are probably, that's fine, because it's one student doing one thing, but with the clinical sites, and we do get this, I'm thinking of you guys down at the University of South Alabama, have a lot of clinical sites in Mississippi and Florida because of the location, and I know that that's true for other places as well for medical field programs of study. And we don't want to be in the business of regulating any of those. So I think it's worth adding an exclusion in there for that. Okay, good. All right, back down to where we were. Programs. Okay, so back in the day, programs were an important, let's see, went too far. Sorry, folks. Programs, here we go. Were an important part of what AIC was trying to regulate, or the commission was being asked to regulate by institutions. So it's, the idea is that it's one thing to offer just some courses that are high need courses, maybe general education courses or courses associated with a specific technical field. And it's another thing to offer an off-campus program. And even though they don't necessarily call it the same thing, SACS does seem to be interested in this as well. The degree to which an institution has the capacity to offer 50% or more of the instruction in a program at a site. And that requests, I think it's approval from SACS the first time that happens. From the state perspective, I think the consideration is more if your off-campus site is, say, outside your service area, that the institutions in the service area want to know that you are now planning to offer a program, is kind of where this is going. So previously, AICS rules have required that the program, off-campus program, get approval from the commission. And what we want to do, that we talked about last time, is align the way these regulations work more with the way SACS works, which is for SACS, this all falls under the site, and the site has certain offerings. And whenever you need to update your offerings, you are modifying the site, not modifying the program. So we still need a definition, but my hope is we can get to that better alignment. Go ahead, Kim.
With SACS, the first program you offer at a site where 50% or more of the instruction is delivered at that site, you that's when you get approval for that site. They're not interested in courses unless it's 25 to 49%, which is a notification.
Mhm. Yeah, and I don't believe that anywhere in our rules it talks about the 25 to 49%, because, well, back in 2007, SACS hadn't taken an interest in the percentage of programs in the same way that they do now. But also, I think this is another lens through which the commission is different from SACS, where there's an interest in knowing even below the 25% what's going on. So, but that's something we can talk about when we get down to the policies. Okay. So program. Service area, we talked about this definition last time. And we can talk more about what the service areas are and how they were designated once we get a little further. Okay, so we've talked about scope, adding our clinical sites, exclusion. Okay, so here is something I want to talk to y'all about conceptually, which is the way I have tried to wrangle these establishment of new sites and different kinds of sites that have different either approval or notifications. Sometimes they include written consent. So follow along with me and tell me if y'all think that this will work. Previously, there wasn't a lot of information. It was kind of assumed. So I do think we need a little more structure. But I wanted to start with establishment of a new site, new off-campus site within the service area. So with the service area, as we remember, that's included up, I'm just sorry for the scrolling, up under the exemptions, right? 2-year sites within the service area, 4-year sites within the service area. But they do different things from some of the other exemptions, which is why I thought it might be helpful to have them on their own. So it's prior notification, that's because they're exempt. And then the documentation, so you can see some of the, text appears in black because it was in the previous policy, it was just somewhere else. So the documentation that comes to us, we would want a course list. This text that appears in blue, and specifically this one that appears highlighted, I believe is in the spirit of what was previously considered under that program approval. But I do want to get feedback on this. So imagine that you are an institution who has multiple other institutions within your service area. Are these things that you would want to know about? If it has program coursework. And so otherwise it's just courses. But if there's program coursework being added, I guess this is specifically for universities, then the kind of coursework in the program that it applies to would be part of the list. Then the second piece that's highlighted here is if that percentage is over 50%, there may be a need to seek approval. Now, we could make that stronger. I believe in the previous version, all of the, programs in its entirety had to seek approval. But there may be instances, there are carve-outs where, institutions in the service area don't offer any of that. I looked up one previous example where UAB was proposing to offer, MD coursework at a hospital site in the Montgomery region. And there are no institutions in that region who would have any issue with that. And so it did not require the same level of scrutiny as it would have if other institutions had been offering it. So we wanted to leave that leeway, but we can be more specific and enumerate the times when approval is required if we need to do that. I know y'all are all digesting this. So what I'm gonna, chime in if you have questions, but I'm also gonna put, for our purposes, a comment in here and say, institutional input requested.
And I do appreciate that because I know this might be one of those areas where I need to follow up with some folks on this side. I know we do have some of our institutions here, but I know this may be a piece where there is some concern.
And, specifically, I'll kind of put an underline here. It's the maybe, right, which allows it to be flexible. We can be stronger or we can put this somewhere else. So again, we appreciate you all being thoughtful about it.
Can you remind me what the yellow highlight is? I had to jump on a call at the very beginning and missed that.
Yes, so the yellow highlighting are mostly things I specifically wanted to remind myself to talk to y'all about today. Because these were changes from our last conversation.
Okay.
So that's really just, it doesn't mean anything within the policy except pay attention to this. Okay, so the reason that this is highlighted in yellow is because this, even though some of these provisions appear in black, the organization of this under documentation required for the site is new. So the course list is not new, but putting it here is new. This section on funding for off-campus instruction, you can see that this is black. That was in the previous policy, but it was down below. And we are thinking that it would be good to know this when we review the site. And what I'm imagining this would look like is a checkbox. Will this site be self-sustaining through tuition fees and extramural support? Yes. And then if you check no, then we would want some kind of business plan. And we can talk about what such business plan would look like, but basically we want to know how long it's going to take for your new off-campus site to become self-sustaining. So if it needs a lot of equipment or a lot of upgrades, you know, how long do you plan to invest in it before you start making a return on the site? And this again pertains to AIC's function of stewarding state funds. And I'll
So
ask-
Robin, this is Rena.
ahead.
So you're saying now today, if this were, you know, the regulation, that it would just be a checkbox, but there's not necessarily anything that would say in the future they wouldn't expect more, correct?
That
Like
is true.
on tomorrow, that somebody could interpret that as saying, oh no, you know, they really need to give us the business plan no matter what. You know what I mean? That
think
they
this
still are
is-
gonna have to prove the how it's gonna be self-supporting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to walk a fine line between being so specific here versus allowing some either additional guidance or the form itself. You know, there is an old off-campus site form, and there is nothing on that form right now about funding, even though in our existing policy, this black section is here, it should be self-supporting.
Right.
But the commission has never looked into that.
Okay.
And so this would really be dictated by the form, I think. But you're right, somebody in the future who is not as
Yeah.
reasonable as all of us could come and say, we need to see a business plan. But I think it's, you know, conditioned on if the institution plans to use funding. And this reallocation language is intended to mirror what we do for new program proposals, internal reallocations. But we can, you know, tweak that language if we need to.
I'm not familiar with this part from SACS-COC, so probably there's many more expert individuals to say when an institution is applying for an off-campus site now through SACS-COC, are they are having to provide a business plan and all of that?
Anybody who has processed one of these know the answer to that. If not, I'm writing a note, research needed on whether SACS-COC requests funding.
Can you repeat that?
I was gonna say Kim should be able to answer this.
Yeah, I'm
Kim, when
sorry,
we-
I
Kim,
didn't
when we
hear it.
submitted our OCIS proposals, did we have to include a business plan that had to do with cost of the facility and that sort of thing?
We had to address how we were paying for it and what kind of resources we were putting into the facility and you know, if we were needing new faculty, equipment, that kind of thing. It doesn't look like the one for that AIC requires in a proposal, but we did have to address that.
Did SACS have a specific format that they requested that information, or was it just a narrative?
No, it wasn't in a certain format. We just had to address it. And then they came back with some additional questions, I think one time.
Okay. But there is a prompt. They have a prompt that's
Right.
about.
It wasn't real specific so that, you know, if you have several programs or whatever out there.
Mhm.
But is SACS concerned when you do the business plan or talk about these things? Are they asking about whether or not a program would be self-sustaining at these off-campus sites? Or do you have
No,
to
just that the
demonstrate that?
university supports it.
Okay,
No, I think SACS is much more concerned with that you have the resources to
Right.
deliver quality instruction at the site.
yeah.
rather
Yeah, they
than
wanna
how
know
it's
your-
funded.
Your budgeting, you know, and with our case, you know, it was part of a already established department. It was a program, you know, so yeah. had it not been there that way, it might have been more questions on the back end, but it was not real specific. They just want to make sure the university is supporting the site and what's going on at the site. And in our case, they determined that we were.
Thanks.
Mhm.
So yes, what I'm hearing is operationalizing this so that it's not burdensome is of interest to those on the call. And I don't think we're interested in making it burdensome for ourselves either. You know, we don't want a full business plan the way the proposals are, but only if, you know, there are projected expenditures. So Stacy is suggesting look at SACs, right, rather than call it a business plan. Yeah, so that, so I'll put that in the note. Consider alignment with SAC COC, especially regarding business plan. Okay, so that's research note for me. All right, anybody else on that one? All right, so again, I've highlighted this third thing to say written consent not required. So trying to make it easier to understand those sections of the policy as it exists that apply to written consent. Okay, so we've got some black text that's going across here. And this was kind of down at the bottom under programs. So I'm recommending to put it here. All universities located in the same county or service area should work together to avoid unnecessary duplication, but written consent is not required. So there might be a follow-up question from AIC like, oh, do y'all really need this if so-and-so has got this going on? But really, this is just intended to recognize the status quo. All right, so that's 4 new off-campus sites in your service area. All right, so now this is highlighted again to attract your attention and say, okay, how do we like this organization of the next section being establishment of a new exempt site outside the service area. So we're outside the service area, but the site is exempt. All right, and here it follows kind of a similar format. Prior notification, seeking to offer instruction must receive approval unless the site is exempt. Okay, so prior notification. So this is basically just a restatement of the status quo. But we've split the service area off into its own section and then other exemptions here. All right, documentation, similar to above. So the documentation would have the course list, again, with the same language that we just talked about. So as you're reading this, you would see any comments that we had above would apply here as well. Whatever we change up there, we would change here. Funding, again, right? So the same needing to think about whether we call this a business plan. Okay, so written consent. So this is the piece that's different for the off-campus sites that are outside the service area. And you can see that a lot of this, there's a lot of text that's black that's about to come because the original policy was very concerned about this. All right, so the idea, we moved some of this around to provide justification. Desirable for the closest institution to provide off-campus instruction, then the commission requires that institutions obtain written consent in certain circumstances, right? Okay, so let me just make sure I've got this, that I'm communicating this accurately. Commission requires that institutions seeking to offer instruction at a new site outside their service area obtain written consent from institutions whose service area includes the proposed site. in certain circumstances, because there are some times where it's not required. All right, so let's go through those. All right, so number one, or little Romanet 1. Written consent is not required if the site is one of the statutory exemptions. Okay, so remember those had to do with the site was around before 1960 or 78 and business, but just I'll scroll back up just so we can remind ourselves. These ones that say exempted by statute. One question that I have for the group, initial policy does not address this, is about, or we've actually talked about this a couple of times, is about these two other exemptions. These were commission-approved exemptions that came as part of the revision of that policy back in 2007. Off-campus prison sites and off-campus high school sites. So this is not all dual enrollment, but only when your university or community college is going to a high school with your faculty to deliver instruction at a high school site. These were both exempted from commission approval, but the previous policy was somewhat confusing about whether they needed to have written consent. If we were to go back and look at it, my initial interpretation is that written consent would be required because these were not specifically carved out. Or maybe this one was, but that one wasn't. But we could carve them out here. But then we have this question of, okay, I'm going back to where we're new exempt off-campus sites. So high school sites and prison sites are both exempt, but they're not exempt by statute. So the question is, do we want them to be subject to written consent or not? Now, the text around written consent, a lot of it is in this black because that was part of the main focus of the policy. Was 2-year colleges and universities offering lower division course in each other's service areas. Universities offering courses in the service area of another university. And then there was this kind of blanket rule. No off-campus site may be located nearer than 25 miles to a main campus of another institution. And by putting it here, I'm interpreting this 25-mile rule as being only outside your service area. The previous policy was somewhat ambiguous on this, but it didn't make sense to me if institutions share a service area, right? So I think it, this really, I would say, is intended only when the site is outside the service area. Okay. So, main questions here. Do you all think that this organization around exempt off-campus site outside the service area makes sense? And if so, then we can focus on some of these very specific circumstances around written consent.
I think the organization is fine, Robin.
Right. I think the goal here is to make it easier for y'all to figure out which requirements pertain to the site that you're trying to add. So by organizing it as in service area, out of service area, that kind of makes that the priority as you consider the site. And because there's so much more freedom within your own service area. So then it has the fewest requirements. And then as you go outside your service area, then it starts to become a consideration of how do your offerings interact with those other institutions offering instruction in the service area. And then obviously you can imagine where this is going to go next, which is non-exempt sites. And non-exempt sites, because of the nature of exemptions, are all out of the service area. Okay. So I'm assuming that there really isn't a lot of concern about these original provisions around written consent. Yes, and Trish says ACCS already has the president sign this. Yes, and so that's usually something that when AIC gets the notice for the site, when it's between two community colleges, we'll ask Trish at ACCS to provide us with the site agreement, and that satisfies this written consent. So basically ACCS handles it internally already.
So this still doesn't address the carve out, correct, that you were talking about?
Yes,
The-
and by carve out those
I mean, for
situations.
the prison and the high school sites. That we have them carved out, but they're not statutory. Correct? Is that what you were saying earlier?
Correct. So this, what I've written here is more or less, it's a
Okay.
slightly different wording, but this is in line with the status quo. The status quo was written consent is not required for the statutory exemptions.
Okay. Just being,
So my question for y'all is, do we want written consent to continue to be the way things operate for prison sites? Which actually, frankly, prison sites, we often don't ask for it already, so I would think, if a prison site is willing to set up instruction with an institution, then do the other institutions in the service area need to know about it? Often we will see that there are multiple institutions offering coursework at a prison site, the same site, because of the way that instruction is organized within those sites. It's often not exclusive. And so therefore we have basically said if you want to offer instruction there, great. And we have not required written consent. Yeah, and so yes, within ACCS, Trish says, yes, only Ingram State offers instruction within the prison site. Now, what I am seeing though is that there are some universities who are also offering instruction at some of the same sites that ACCS already offers at. Presumably they are offering different coursework. And if we want to make sure that AIC is more, does a deeper review, which we have not been doing, I'll confess to that, on the prison site, comparing courses and duplication between community colleges and universities, then we can do that. Now that we have an inventory that shows us that they're really operating in similar places. We didn't have enough information necessarily to do that kind of review before. So certainly, this is going to pertain to some institutions more than others. And some institutions, may feel like we do that this doesn't need the same level of review. But if there is an interest in us being more scrutinizing of duplication and service areas within the prison sites offerings, we will do that. The high school sites, I think, are a different case because there are so many and the proliferation has become very great. Some institutions do offer dual enrollment coursework or dual enrollment offerings on their own campus. That is not what we're talking about. Regulating, this would only be when the offering happens at the high school site. And so we currently do review those, do look at service areas, and do require more when an institution is trying to go outside its service area. The question that I'm posing is, do we want to keep that status quo? Or do we want to create more flexibility where institutions can partner with high schools more easily outside their service area? Go ahead, Rena. I saw you take yourself off mute.
Oh, yeah, sorry, that was a while ago. I think you already know our position from our email exchange about wanting, our service area and partnering with schools and things like that, with the high schools. So I'll leave
Yeah,
it
so
at
we
that.
did talk about it offline for everybody.
It's not a secret, yeah.
Yeah, and I do think in that conversation and also some others, there has been an interest in institutions knowing when another institution from outside the service area is trying to quote unquote set up shop at a high school in your backyard. So it's almost, the written consent would function here as kind of a notice that this high school is trying to have a relationship where they are bringing onto their high school site university personnel to offer courses. And would you want to know that that's happening in your service area if the institution is out of your service area?
Well, knowing versus written consent are two different things.
That's correct, yes. So
Okay,
knowing can be
that's the-
achieved through the notification process. But you're correct, written consent would mean that the institution would have to tell you in advance. And you would have a right to say, no, we do not want to provide consent for this. And we would ideally rather serve that need ourselves because we're closer. So I know that's a complicated one. Do any other institutions have kind of feelings or reactions on this? Go ahead, Stacy. I saw you come on.
I've heard our provost say that it seems as though, I mean, I'm not aware of what you and Dr. Bristol are discussing, but that it might make sense to allow high schools to choose who they want to partner with, just as high school students choose which college or university they want to attend. So I don't really know. I mean, I'm not sure. I've just heard her say, it seems as though more flexibility would be better so that high schools could choose what they want to do. And change if they want to change.
Right. And so, and I do know that sometimes institutions set up partnership agreements with high schools or with districts that allow their students to take courses on campus or online at reduced rates or some kind of privileged status. This would not govern any of those agreements. This would only be if an institution was going to set up shop in person at the high school. So,
Using the high school teachers.
I suppose those high school teachers, but only if they were, I mean, I don't know how y'all arrange this. When I was in my previous state, I think y'all know I used to work in Rhode Island, they called that concurrent enrollment. It created less confusion to have different terms.
Yes.
So concurrent enrollment being, it was a high school teacher, but that teacher was recognized as a faculty member by the institution through some kind of either adjunct or part-time, but they were, they had
A lot of
enough.
us do that. We have combinations of that too, you know, because some students can take online courses with the quote unquote traditional university faculty, things like that.
Mhm.
But some are on site as well. And I know we've hired some people, you know, to teach some of those gen ed courses that are also high school faculty in the
Yeah.
district.
Which, you know, and if the course is being delivered at your campus, you know, this
Right.
is, you know, just outside the realm of what AIC would want to be regulating out.
So just for clarification, this is only if a college is physically going to go into the high school and teach the course at the high school, and there's already a college there teaching dual enrollment. I think
No.
the,
You were there with me until the last part. So
Okay.
the question is, okay, let's say there's I'm just gonna pick Hoover High School.
Mm.
They're in region, you know, the service area is UAB. Right? And Lawson
Jeff State,
and Jeff State. Okay, I'm sorry, I've got a map here, so I'm looking at my map, like, what else is there?
Mhm.
And maybe Montevallo, depending on where, like,
Mhm.
I just haven't looked at that close enough. So let's say, you know, as a hypothetical that Jacksonville State or Alabama State wants to come and offer at that
okay,
high school, Hoover High School, a course. And that would be at the site, right? Because the site is what we're regulating. The site is outside the service area for Jacksonville State and for Alabama State or for Alabama State. So the question is, in that scenario, would the site from JSU or the site from ASU need to get written consent from UAB and Lawson and Jeff State?
that's.
That's a lot of consent.
This is,
Right, because again, it's about service area.
That's a lot of-
Presumably, the community colleges could offer consent on behalf of their colleges, but, and Shantae jumped in really quickly and said, yes, we would want to know about it.
Yeah, I mean, they would, I think our colleges would want to know. More so what they were going to be teaching. So it does not conflict, because it becomes a bid between, oh, I'm gonna go over here and take English. Oh, no, I'm gonna go over here and take English. So I think for us is, you know, not so much consent, but notification that they are interested in coming into the service areas and what they're going to teach. Most of the it depends on the high school and the college, because it could be a combination of CTE courses and Gen Ed courses taught at the high school.
Right. Mhm.
Right,
And I
So-
think that
and
the
that's-
concern with us would be the Gen Ed, not so much the CTE.
absolutely. So let's, you know, just,
You know,
Also-
I mentioned this last time, asked you this question last time, Robin. I think one of the things I know I'm struggling with as we have these discussions is that we still don't really know the scope of what's being done in terms of these high school sites, like what's being taught where, how much of it is actually going on. And it's almost like we're making decisions about with this pretty big information vacuum.
yes, that
Because
is
I
an
think we're all beginning to
important
feel like, oh, this is a really big problem, but maybe it's not, but we don't know.
point. So-
Also, I would say how much attention colleges and universities are giving to those off-campus high school sites. I mean, like we send department heads and supervisors out to observe dual enrollment adjunct teachers in the high schools, you know, just as quality control.
The same in the community. They have to go out and evaluate. They have to do, because they're employed by the college, so they have to have an evaluation, classroom observations. Depending on the college, they may require them to attend faculty meetings, their department faculty meetings. So
Dr. Calhoun raises an interesting question about the difference between notice and consent. And does it ever get to consent, or is it simply notice? And,
So-
and it's interesting that the question that you've posed, Robin, is about a university or a college giving notice, when it's almost as though in some instances it might be the high school, right? That they want something. And so sending out notice that we're thinking about adding this. And here, that's what I'm thinking
That's
about, the
just-
agency of the high school.
Yes, because it became, I'm gonna be honest, being a former dean at a college, it really, that high school principal drives the bus. And if you have a new principal come in, they just have a vested interest in this college and they don't want this college to spend it. So I agree with you. It's almost like the high schools need to give some notification of what they're planning or what they're going to do, because you can have several different colleges in one high school offering courses.
Oh, yes, yes, we wouldn't imagine that it's exclusive.
Yeah.
Right, they're. And that was another consideration that came up for us around this written consent. Is, well, if it's non-exclusive, you can have multiple post-secondary institutions offering coursework at the same high school site, then does written consent matter? The question about notification, I think that's still, I mean, that's the point of the prior notification process with AIC, is that before the instruction actually starts taking place, then we put it on one of our agendas, we say which college, at which site, with which courses. And then if they're like upper division courses, it would say more about which program that would pertain to. So that notice, that's the status quo. And we would not want to take that away. It's this consent piece. Yeah. Go ahead, Rena.
I think to their points, and this may be where the information exists. Is the State Board of Education keeping track of dual enrollments?
Well,
Not to the extent that we're talking. I don't think so.
no.
Okay,
And
that's interesting to me because, in some cases they're counting it towards high school credits too. So that's very interesting to hear that.
yes.
I think
and
it's
it-
left up to each school district or
Mhm.
system.
Yeah. And here's another question is it up to students? Can a student on their own do a dual enrollment option through a school?
Well,
They
that
would-
we would consider individual study.
Just
And so for
individual?
AIC's
Okay,
purposes, we don't want to be involved in regulating that, but
got it. Yeah.
somebody
Okay.
should be aware that that's happening.
Right, well,
They-
you would
they
hope
would-
so.
Well, I don't know. Well, for us, for ACCS, they would still have to have consent.
Okay,
Say for instance, if a student wants to go to another community college, they would still have to have permission from that high school principal or counselor
right.
to participate.
Mhm. Yeah, so there's permission. Yeah,
Yes,
in that
and I
case.
have seen that. I have seen where parents, students they just want them to go to this particular school to do.
Yeah, and we know they do that in the homeschool community, that they're,
Mhm.
homeschoolers often do that, so. Okay. Sorry, Robin, I'm
Okay.
asking too many questions today.
No, see, this is important and
Mm-hmm.
we want to get it right, because I think back in 2007, when this was last looked at, the landscape was just very different. They were also really concerned with distance education. So the off-campus site policy originally included regulations for distance education, and then that was split off into its own policy because it should have been. So I'm glad they did that. But that's why we have a separate distance ed policy. So that was their concern. Now we have other concerns, so it's important to update it to what the lay of the land is now. I do hear you, Rena, in your recommendation for additional information about sites in existence. And I am pleased to say that we are finally feeling more on top of that with our site inventory, and that is going to be released at the June meeting. with all of the sites. We're gonna organize some of it by county so that it's easier to see. And we'll also make it easier to see when there are multiple institutions offering instruction at the same site, which is not something that was apparent in the previous way that annual reports had been done.
Yeah,
So-
well, I've seen, I just did an accreditation site visit for music in Texas. And I saw, there, they've been, the state has been leveraging dual enrollment for so long. I mean, a majority of the students are coming to college with 60 credits.
Hmm.
So it's kind of, it's very impressive if we can figure it out as a state for our students.
Yep. And then, of course, there's funding, who's paying for it, which was a big consideration when I was in Rhode Island. And, but again, I just want to, limit our scope with AIC to the off-campus site portion of it, not the whole bottle of, barrel of monkeys, let's say.
I
Okay,
just feel like I have to say, there's a lot to be said for cost savings, and I understand that. But I know that we already have dual enrollment students coming in with 60 hours, going into certain fields, and they are not ready for those. Healthcare, education, they can't be out at 20 and be a high school teacher. I mean, there's lots of issues. And we've realized too, and I'm sure you all have as well, and I'm sure your faculty have, that some of these students just aren't as prepared. I mean, it depends on the institution, but a lot of times English composition is not based in literature anymore, right? Best practices, not literature-based composition courses. So these high school students are missing sometimes 2 years of reading literature that they would have had in the past. So, I mean, and practicing math, just practicing before they get to it. So I understand it's a lot to do with cost savings and having students more quickly finish and be in the workforce, but it's also about the quality. I think there are just some challenges that academia is dealing with and trying to figure out how to address.
all right, well, I think let's stop there. And so I will, like I promised before, we'll post this to our webinar page. I will also post the document that we've been working in that has our questions embedded. And we will offer another open forum. Since we're expanding our timeline, I don't think it's urgent enough for us to need to do it 2 weeks from now. So does anybody object to putting another one of these on next month? And we can work on this over the summer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be good.
Okay,
Yeah, let us get through the end of the term, because
Right.
I'll have different term ending dates.
okay. All right. And thanks y'all for all your questions and thoughtful interaction, and I'll see you soon.
Right.
Bye now.